Wait, this is the woman they sent me? In that dress? Preston Hale's voice sliced through the cold air of his grand foyer, sharp as the December wind still clinging to the doorway behind him. His tone wasn't raised, but the disbelief in it echoed loudly in the marbled silence. Amara James stood on his porch, her thin coat soaked at the hem, her dress threadbare and faded, with one of the sleeves patched from the inside. She was soaked in more than snow. It was the kind of chill that clung to the bones after days of running from something you couldn't fight anymore. And she had. Just days ago, 4 days earlier, she had been in a one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Atlanta, surrounded by boxes of textbooks she once used in her classroom, family photos, and her mother's old kitchenware. Everything she hadn't already sold. The knock had come just before dark. 2 men in heavy jackets, smug and impatient. The shorter one spoke first. "You said you'd have it last month, Miss James. We've been patient." Please," Amara had said, clutching her phone. "I just need 1 more week. I have an opportunity. If it works out." The taller one had laughed a cold, rattling thing. "Opportunity? Lady, you've been saying that for months." When she begged again, the short one shoved her backward. "No more stories. Schoolgirl." Her back hit the wall. The room blurred. "Pay or get out." No. The next morning, Amara packed everything she could sell into a single suitcase. She pawned her mother's brooch, sold her old laptop. The landlord kept the rest. By noon, she was walking away from the life she'd tried to salvage, battered, bruised, and utterly alone. Then came the envelope. Cream-colored. No return address. Inside, a letter with a gold foil seal, and an introduction from an anonymous match agency. A name, Preston Hale, a location, Aspen, Colorado, and an offer, mutual arrangement, urgent placement, full discretion. She took it as a sign, maybe the last one she'd ever get. So now, here she stood frozen from the inside out, wearing the only dress she hadn't sold, patched by hand and worn at the seams. Her boots had holes stuffed with cloth. Her pride had holes she couldn't patch at all. "My name is Amara James," she said, chin lifted. "You must be Mr. Hale." Preston looked her over once more, his jaw tight. "This is Aspen," he said slowly. "It's -5 degrees. What possessed you to show up like that?" "It's all I own," she replied simply. The wind howled behind her. Preston stood tall, elegant in his gray wool coat, scarf tossed carelessly around his neck like he hadn't known real cold in years. Amara stood in his doorway like a wound, raw and visible, and he didn't know what to do with that. He took 1 step back, hand on the door, ready to shut her out, not out of cruelty, but calculation. This wasn't what he'd agreed to. He needed a presence for his son, not a charity case, not a woman who looked like she'd just escaped a shelter. Then came the soft sound of slippers on hardwood. Theo, the boy, just 7, padded quietly up beside his father. He rarely spoke, not since his mother died. He rarely came close to strangers, but now he stood beside Preston, staring up at the woman in the doorway with wide, curious eyes. "Is she the lady?" he asked, voice small but certain. Preston stiffened. "Yes, she is." Theo took one more look at Amara, then whispered, "She's pretty." Amara smiled, the first sign of warmth on her face in days. "Hello, Theo," she said gently. He stepped forward, and to Preston's shock, took her hand. "She's cold," Theo said softly. "She should come in." "Mo." Preston felt something stutter inside him. A heartbeat. A memory. Theo hadn't touched anyone outside their family in months. Not the therapist. Not the teachers. But now he stood beside this stranger, this woman in rags, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Preston exhaled slowly. "One night," he said gruffly. "You can stay 1 night." Amara stepped inside. Snowflakes melted instantly on her shoulders, leaving small, dark patches on the worn fabric. She didn't look around like someone stepping into wealth. She didn't tremble or gawk. She simply nodded her thanks and allowed Theo to lead her toward the fireplace, where the flames burned low and steady. Preston didn't move from the doorway. He watched them, his son and this unknown woman. Theo held her hand like it had always belonged there. Amara's eyes scanned the room not with hunger, but with quiet observation. as if memorizing where warmth lived and where it was still missing. The door clicked shut behind him. That night, the house wasn't quiet. It wasn't cold. Something had changed. The silence that had once ruled every hallway now made room for other sounds. The clink of a teacup. The soft hum of a lullaby. Laughter. Theo's laughter. Preston stayed in his study, bourbon in hand, staring at a stack of unopened letters tied in blue ribbon. Sarah's handwriting curled across the top. Her words echoed in his mind. If you ever feel yourself going numb, listen to Theo's laugh. Find someone who makes it happen again. And she had. The next morning, Theo found a small wooden bird tucked into his Christmas stocking, a chickadee, carved simply from pine. Its wings were delicate. Its eyes kind. Did you make this? He asked Amara. I did, she said. I love it. He hugged her without hesitation. Over the boy's head, Amara met Preston's eyes. She didn't ask to stay. She didn't need to. Preston turned away, unsettled. But the door he had nearly closed had stayed open. And somehow, he wasn't ready to shut it. If this moment moved you, give it a like and comment where you're watching from. Someone nearby might be listening too. The snow hadn't let up by morning. It fell in soft, steady drapes against the tall windows of Preston Hale's mountain estate, muffling the world in silence. Outside, the evergreens stood heavy with white, branches sagging under the weight. Inside, something quieter was unfolding, a shift so small, it might have gone unnoticed if not for the way it settled in the air, like warmth returning to a long-abandoned room. Preston stood at the edge of the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, watching the flicker of flames in the fireplace and the two figures seated in front of it. Theo was still in his pajamas, cross-legged on the rug, holding the wooden bird Amara had carved. He turned it over carefully in his hands, then showed it to her, pointing to the wings. What kind of bird is it again? He asked. A chickadee, Amara replied, voice low and kind. They stay through the winter, even when it's hard. They're brave little things. Theo smiled. I like that. Preston took a slow sip of his coffee. He wasn't sure how long he'd been standing there. Maybe long enough for the bitterness in his cup to cool. Maybe longer. His son's voice filled the room with something he hadn't heard in over a year. Curiosity. Engagement. Joy. It had only been 12 hours. He walked to the kitchen table, placed his mug down, and opened the fridge. It was fully stocked. Of course, his assistant had it filled weekly. But the silence that filled the space behind him wasn't cold or awkward. It was present, observing. I can make breakfast, Amara said from the living room. Preston turned halfway. You're a guest. She stood slowly, smoothing her wrinkled dress. A guest who can cook. Theo looked up. Can you make pancakes? Preston's eyebrows lifted slightly. Theo hadn't requested food out loud in ages. Preston waited for Amara to hesitate, to defer to him. She didn't. Do you have eggs and flour? She asked. He nodded. Top shelf, left side. She stepped into the kitchen without asking permission. There was no fear in her movements, only a kind of cautious grace, as if she'd walked through worse kitchens and carried heavier silence. She reached for ingredients like someone who had memorized the shape of lac and still chose to create comfort from it. Preston leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You always this confident in other people's kitchens? Amara cracked an egg with practiced ease. I've learned not to wait for permission to be useful. He didn't answer that. Theo climbed onto a stool, eyes wide with anticipation. Mom used to make pancakes with blueberries. Preston froze. Amara glanced at him, then back at Theo. Do you still like them with blueberries? He nodded quickly. But Papa forgets. Preston's jaw flexed. I don't forget. I just haven't made them in a while. Amara's voice stayed gentle. Well then. We'll make them together. Theo beamed. Preston stepped back, letting the moment happen. He watched the way Amara handed Theo the whisk, how she crouched beside him to show him how to stir without splashing batter. The boy laughed as a little flour dusted his nose. You've done this before, Preston said quietly. Amara poured the batter into a pan. I used to teach 3rd grade. Most of them didn't want to sit still either. What happened? The school closed the program. Said it didn't fit their funding goals. And I wasn't exactly photogenic for their brochures. She didn't look at him when she said it, but the bitterness in her voice was not directed at him. Just memory. He said nothing. When breakfast was served, Theo devoured 2 pancakes in record time, then asked for a third. Preston watched as his son licked syrup from his fingers, smiling, really smiling for the first time in months. "You said you were staying one night," Amara said. Not as a question but a statement, after Theo ran off to the den with his bird and a book. "I did," Preston replied. She wiped her hands on a cloth, standing tall despite the sag in her shoulders. "I understand." But he didn't move, didn't speak. Outside, the snow thickened. Preston finally exhaled. "The roads are closed. There's no safe way down the mountain until the plows come through. You'll have to stay longer." A flash of something passed through her eyes, relief, maybe. But she simply nodded. "Understood. You can use the guest room. Top of the stairs, second door." "Yeah, thank you." He turned away. "It's not charity, just practicality." "I didn't think it was either." Later, he retreated to his office again, but this time, he left the door open. Through the hallway, he could hear Theo laughing, Amara reading aloud in a voice that made simple sentences sound like stories again. Preston opened his desk drawer and stared at the stack of letters tied with blue ribbon. Sarah's words rang louder now. "Find someone who brings light without trying." The house had felt cold for so long. Now, for reasons he couldn't articulate, it didn't anymore. There was no magic, no dramatic awakening, just warmth seeping in, quiet and steady, like morning sun through frost-laced windows. One night only, he had said, but the winter was long, and somehow, he no longer felt so sure. Night fell early in Aspen. The light faded behind the mountains by 5, and the snow kept its grip on the world outside Preston Hale's estate, softening the landscape, muting the edges of everything it touched. Inside, the warmth from the fireplace glowed against the dark wood floors, casting dancing light on the walls, as Amara sat cross-legged on the rug beside Theo. She was reading aloud, and so the brave little chickadee stayed behind while all the other birds flew south, not because it had to, but because someone needed to be there. Theo leaned in, eyes wide, fingers wrapped around his wooden bird. "Do you think birds get lonely?" he asked softly. Amara paused. "Sometimes. I think they do. But maybe they remember the voices that kept them company through winter. That's how they stay brave." Theo smiled. From the hallway, Preston stood motionless, half in shadow, listening. Something in the simplicity of that moment made the air feel thicker, like his ribs were too tight around his chest. He hadn't expected her to talk to Theo that way, with such gentleness, with such respect, like he was whole, like he wasn't something fragile. He remembered Sarah reading in the same spot, back straight, fingers brushing through Theo's hair as she read from some old paperback. The room had looked the same then, the flames, the stockings, the stillness, but the silence had been warmer. Now it was warming again. Preston turned away before he could be seen. He wasn't ready to step into that light just yet. In the kitchen, he opened a bottle of Cabernet, poured a modest glass, and stared out the window at the white world beyond. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. He glanced at the screen. Carson. 2 missed calls. He groaned under his breath. Elaine Carson. The ever-prying widow of his former business partner, and one of the few people in Aspen who never seemed to accept boundaries. She had been sniffing around ever since Sarah passed, always calling at odd hours, offering support, or worse, suggestions. The message flashed next. Elaine. "I heard you have company. Care to explain?" He put the phone down, drained the glass, and didn't reply. Behind him, Amara entered quietly. She held a towel in her hands, the edge of which was covered in flour and what looked like syrup. "I cleaned the counters," she said simply. "Hope that's all right." "You don't need to do that," Preston replied without turning around. "I know." He finally turned to face her. The firelight from the other room caught the edge of her cheekbone, painting her skin gold. Her dress still looked like it belonged to another decade, and the fabric hung in tired waves, but somehow, she looked less worn tonight, like something had eased in her. "You read well," he said. She raised a brow. "Thank you? It's not common. Reading to children like that, it takes patience, presence." Amara shrugged. "I used to read to 20 of them at a time, 3rd graders. Loud, fidgety, beautiful kids. I figured if I could hold their attention for 10 minutes, I was doing something right." He studied her for a long beat. "Why did you say yes?" her brow furrowed. To the letter? He nodded. I was out of options, she answered honestly. But I also didn't want to give up. He waited. I thought, she hesitated. I thought maybe someone like you, someone with everything, might be missing something too. That struck deeper than he expected. He looked down. Well, he said, I wasn't looking for a savior. Amara folded the towel slowly. Neither was I. Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just real. Then, from the den, Theo's voice called out, Miss Amara, can you help me hang my stocking? Amara smiled softly. Of course, little one. She started to walk away but paused. Your son's heart is open, she said without turning back. Even if yours isn't yet. Preston didn't answer. He watched her walk down the hall, her steps quiet, deliberate. And for the first time in a long time, he wondered if someone could walk through your house and start mending more than just what was broken on the surface. He followed her at a distance, stopping at the threshold to the den. There they were. Theo stood on his tiptoes, pointing to the exact spot Sarah had chosen every Christmas. Amara held the stocking carefully, following his instructions without correction or comment. When it was hung, Theo stepped back, assessing. Perfect, he said. Then, his voice dropped. Miss Amara, can I tell you something? She knelt beside him. Always. He leaned in close. Papa doesn't smile anymore, not since Mama went to heaven. He used to smile all the time. Now he just works. And stares. Preston's breath caught in his throat. Amara didn't glance back. She simply took Theo's small hand and held it between hers. Grief is love with nowhere to go, she said gently. But that doesn't mean it disappears. Sometimes, it just waits, quietly, until someone helps us find a place for it again. Theo looked at her, eyes wide. Can I help him remember? I think you already are. In the silence that followed, Preston backed away, heart pounding, throat tight. He made his way back to the kitchen, poured another half glass of wine, but didn't drink it. His hands were too unsteady. There was something terrifying in being seen, and somehow, she had seen everything. The next morning came with a reluctant sun, just enough light to turn the frost on the windows to lace. Aspen remained buried under its wintry silence. A stillness so complete, it made every sound within the house more intimate. The clink of cutlery, the shuffle of slippers on hardwood, the rustle of pages being turned. Preston Hale sat alone in the kitchen, a black mug of coffee steaming before him. He wasn't reading the news. He wasn't scrolling his phone. He was just sitting, watching the steam curl into the air like questions he wasn't ready to answer. Across the room, on the side table near the fireplace, something caught his eye. A small wooden bird. Carved from pine. Sanded smooth and simple. The wings were imperfect, one slightly thicker than the other, but it was delicate. It looked alive, perched, as if it might lift from the table and take flight. Theo's voice rang out from the hallway. Papa, look what she made me. Ugh. Preston looked up. Theo came running, holding the bird in both hands, cradling it like it was treasure. His eyes were bright, cheeks flushed with excitement. It was in my stocking. Preston blinked. She made that? Theo nodded. She carved it. She said chickadees stay in the snow. They don't fly away. Amara entered behind him, quiet as snowfall. Her dress was the same, the one she had arrived in, patched and thin. But her hair was tied back neatly, and her posture carried no apology. I found a bit of scrap wood near the shed, she said. I used a paring knife from the kitchen. Hope that's all right. Preston's gaze lingered on the bird, then on Theo's face. The boy was practically glowing. It's more than all right, Preston said quietly. Amara gave a small nod. Do you carve? He asked, unsure why he cared. I used to, she said. When I was a teacher, I made small pieces for my students. Animals, bookmarks. We didn't have much, so I tried to make memories instead. That struck a chord, a quiet one. Theo tugged at her sleeve. Can you teach me? If your father's all right with it, she replied. Preston hesitated. Not because he doubted her skills, but because this was new. His son inviting someone in. Craving connection. He nodded. As long as you're careful. The rest of the morning unfolded in quiet moments. Amara helping Theo sand down another piece of wood. Preston observing from a distance, not wanting to intrude but unable to look away. At one point, Theo turned to him and said, "Papa, we should put the bird by Mama's candle." Preston's throat tightened. The small memorial on the mantel hadn't been touched in 2 years. Just a photo of Sarah, a single white candle, and a dried flower from the last bouquet she received. "You sure?" he asked. Theo nodded solemnly. Amara said nothing. She simply stood beside Theo as he placed the wooden bird gently beside the photo, his little fingers adjusting its angle like it mattered. "Now it can keep her company," he said. Something cracked inside Preston then. Not painfully, not loudly, but something shifted. Grief, long frozen, began to stir. That afternoon, Preston stepped outside for the first time in days. The snow crunched beneath his boots, and the cold bit at his face like it wanted to wake him up. He walked to the old storage shed behind the house, a structure that had stood unused since the winter Sarah passed. Inside, it smelled of dust and cedar. Cobwebs in the corners, old tools lined the back wall. He pulled a tarp off a wooden crate, revealing his carving set untouched, preserved. He brought it inside. That evening, after Theo went to bed, Preston entered the kitchen to find Amara rinsing dishes. The light above her cast a warm halo over her features. She was humming a low, wordless tune. Something about it felt familiar, even if he couldn't place it. He cleared his throat. She stopped and turned. "I found my old tools," he said. "Used to carve a bit, when Theo was little." Her eyes softened. "You made the cradle? And a few of his toys." He paused. "I forgot what that felt like, to use my hands for something other than typing or signing documents." Amara dried her hands with the edge of a towel. "Creation is healing," she said. "It reminds us we still have something to offer." Preston looked at her for a long moment. "You say things like that a lot." She tilted her head slightly. "Things like what?" "Like you've been carrying wisdom for other people your whole life." A faint smile. "Sometimes we have to hold it for others before we're allowed to use it for ourselves." He wasn't sure what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He simply nodded, then placed a block of wood and a chisel on the kitchen table. "I'm out of practice," he said. "Then start small." Saturday, she returned to her seat across from him. For the next 20 minutes, they worked in companionable silence. He shaved the first layers of wood, slow and cautious. She threaded a needle and patched the tear in one of Theo's gloves. It was the closest thing to peace he'd known in years. When he looked up, she was already watching him, not intrusively, not with expectation, just seeing. That night, as he passed Theo's room, he heard the boy whispering in the dark. "Miss Amara, you still there?" "I'm here, little one." "Good, just checking." Preston stood outside the door a while, listening. Maybe one night wasn't enough after all. Morning came slower in Preston Hale's estate than it did in the city. The sun, reluctant to rise over the frosted ridgelines, cast its first gold rays through the tall windows around 8. It touched everything gently, the leather of the armchairs, the pine floors, the sleeping warmth still lingering in the air from the night's fire. In the kitchen, the scent of something new lingered in the air. Nutmeg, maybe, or cinnamon. Preston wasn't sure. He followed the smell barefoot, in joggers and a long-sleeved shirt. The house was unusually quiet. No emails pinged. No calls. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the hiss of a hot pan. Amara stood at the stove. The same dress clung to her frame, patched, worn, but she moved like a woman who belonged in the space. A woman who had always belonged in kitchens, in morning light, in the center of warmth. Theo sat at the breakfast bar, swinging his legs and watching her closely as she flipped something in the skillet. "Papa, she makes French toast." Preston blinked. "You've had French toast before, but not like this. It smells like Christmas." Amara glanced over her shoulder. "Your bread was going stale. I figured it was better to rescue it than throw it away." Preston leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Creative." "No, I taught high school art for 1 year," she said, sliding a golden slice onto Theo's plate, "before the budget cuts." "You taught art in 3rd grade?" "I've worn a few hats," she said simply. She poured 2 mugs of coffee, one for herself, one for him, and set them on the table without asking. Then she placed the pan in the sink and wiped her hands. Preston stared at the cup, then at her. You didn't have to. I know. Theo took a bite and made a delighted sound. Papa, can we have this every day? Preston almost smiled. Almost. He took a seat. The coffee was hot, just the way he liked it. Not a word had been exchanged about how. Amara sat too, folding her hands. Do you always wake up this early? Habit. Work? No, grief. The answer surprised them both. Amara didn't ask for clarification. She let the word breathe. After a moment, she spoke. I stopped sleeping past dawn after my mother died. She always sang in the mornings. Silence felt wrong. He glanced at her. You don't talk about her much. Not because I don't remember her, she said, but because most people don't know how to hold stories that aren't easy. Preston studied her across the table. Try me. Amara looked down at her hands. The knuckles were red from the cold, and a thin white scar ran across her index finger. She was a nurse, she began. Worked the night shift for 20 years. Raised me alone. Sang in the kitchen while making eggs, even when we couldn't afford butter. She had a way of making everything stretch: a paycheck, a prayer, a pot of soup. Theo stopped chewing. He listened, silent. After she passed, I kept trying to live with the same dignity she had. That kind of quiet strength. It's not loud. It doesn't draw attention. But when it's gone, you notice. Preston's voice was low. She sounds like someone my wife would have admired. Amara's eyes met his. I'm not here to replace anyone, Mr. Hale. I know, he said. That's not what I'm afraid of. Then what are you afraid of? Preston didn't answer. From the hallway, a chime echoed his phone. He rose reluctantly and walked to the foyer, where it sat charging near the entryway. 2 new messages, both from Elaine Carson. Elaine, Aspen Weekly wants to confirm rumors about your guest. Elaine, you know how this looks, Preston. He stared at the screen, then turned it face down. Back in the kitchen, Amara had begun clearing the table. Theo had disappeared, likely curled up with a book or his toy bird near the fire. People are going to talk, Preston said suddenly. Amara paused mid-step. They always do. You don't know this town. She turned, holding his gaze. No, but I know the kind of town it is. That's not an answer. She placed a plate in the sink. I've lived in 4 states. I've taught in underfunded schools, stood in food lines, and heard worse things said about me than I'm sure your friends could come up with, so no gossip doesn't scare me. Preston crossed his arms. It's not about fear, it's about appearances. A faint laugh escaped her. That's rich, considering I showed up at your door in a dress older than your wine cellar. He almost smiled again. Almost. Your son doesn't care what I wore, she added softly. He only cares how I treat him. Maybe you should too. The words weren't cruel, just true. Preston's eyes narrowed not in anger, but recognition. She had a way of saying things that hit like scripture, sharp, honest, strangely healing. That afternoon, while Theo napped, Preston went to his workshop for the first time in nearly 2 years. The space smelled of cedar dust and old ideas. His tools lay untouched, lined up like mourners. He picked up a small chisel, rubbed the handle with his thumb, then reached for a block of pine. The motion came slowly, rough at first, then familiar. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, something was being carved back into shape. The next morning brought quiet, heavy snow and an unusual hush inside the house. Like even the wind knew something delicate was beginning to unfold. Preston Hale entered the living room with a legal pad tucked under his arm, intent on reviewing contracts he had ignored for the last 3 days. But the sight before him stopped him cold. Amara sat on the floor, legs folded beneath her, teaching Theo how to stitch a torn sock. Like this, she said softly, guiding his small fingers through the thread. 1 loop at a time. Steady and patient. You're not just fixing fabric. You're showing it. You still care. Theo giggled. Socks can't feel. No, but you can, and that's what matters. Preston cleared his throat. Both heads turned toward him. Amara smiled, but not as a performance, just a quiet acknowledgement that he was part of the space too. Morning, she said. He nodded. You're up early. Theo grinned. We've been up for an hour. Miss Amara made oatmeal with cinnamon, like Mama used to. The words hit like a stone to the chest. Preston looked away. Amara, sensing the shift, stood and dusted her hands. I hope you don't mind. It was leftover steel-cut oats. I hate to waste good food. I don't mind, he replied too quickly. She picked up the sock Theo had been working on and handed it to him. Your stitches are crooked, but they'll hold. That's what counts. Theo looked proud. And Preston, who hadn't seen his son beam like that in over a year, couldn't look away. Later, while Theo read on the rug with his toy bird perched nearby, Preston found Amara in the hallway, folding linens. I have staff for that, he said. I know, she replied. But I need to be useful. Idle hands make me anxious. He hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you wait to find someone easier? He gestured vaguely. Someone without a son, without ghosts. Someone who could offer more than a broken house in the mountains. Amara placed the folded towel down carefully. Then she looked up at him, voice level. I didn't choose you because you were broken, Mr. Hale. I chose you because I could see where things still lived. The way your son watches the world like it might surprise him. The way your house holds on to warmth even when no one's asking for it. He swallowed. You looked at me and saw rags, she said, not accusingly, just naming the truth. But I see worth, not in what I wear, not in what I lost, but in what I refused to give up. Preston said nothing. Amara continued, her voice softer now. You think you're protecting your son from chaos, but you're also shielding him from healing. The words landed hard. That evening, Preston sat at his old workbench. The pine block in front of him was beginning to take shape a flower, rough but visible. He hadn't carved in 2 years, but his hands remembered. He wasn't ready to say it out loud, but something about the way Amara moved in the house without needing permission was forcing his walls to shift. He thought of Sarah, of her laugh in this room, her soft humming, her belief in dignity before status. He remembered something she once wrote in the margin of a book. What you offer the world is not measured by what you own, but what you give even when it costs you. Amara was giving, constantly, with no guarantee of anything in return. The next morning, he found her in the pantry, reorganizing the shelves. You don't have to do that, he said again, but there was no edge in his voice now. She looked over her shoulder. You keep saying that, and I keep doing it anyway. Because you need to be useful? She turned, a box of oats in her hand. Because I've lived in places where no one noticed if you disappeared. So now, I do things that leave a mark. Preston took a breath. You've made a mark here. She raised a brow, cautious. Not just with Theo, he said. With me. There was a silence between them full, not awkward. The kind of silence that asked nothing and revealed everything. Thank you, she said at last. That night, when she went to her guest room, she found a carved flower on her windowsill. Rough-edged, slightly uneven, but unmistakably beautiful. She didn't mention it the next morning. She didn't need to. The morning sun came late, crawling over the snow-covered slopes of Aspen as if reluctant to light the day. Preston Hale stood outside the general store on Main Street, his coat pulled tight against the chill. His breath came in visible clouds, and he glanced down the sidewalk, aware as always that his presence drew attention. Not because he was famous, but because he was known. And in a small town, that was far more dangerous. He had left early, telling Amara he needed to restock supplies. That wasn't a lie. They were low on flour, coffee, and cinnamon, oddly enough. Things that had been in abundance before she arrived. But that wasn't the reason he drove down the mountain today. He needed space. He needed to think. Inside the store, the air was warm, the wood stove near the register crackling. He walked the aisles with practiced efficiency. Bread flour, tea, more eggs. He reached for cinnamon and paused. She's still at your house, isn't she? The voice belonged to Elaine Carson. Preston didn't turn. Morning, Elaine. Elaine's heels clicked against the floor as she approached. Her fur-lined coat pristine. Her lipstick a shade too red for the hour. I heard she arrived in unfortunate fashion. Preston placed the cinnamon in his basket without responding. I'm sure it's not what people think, she continued, her tone dripping with false concern. Though it is Christmas, people expect traditions. not surprises. Preston turned to face her. She's not a surprise. She's a guest. A guest. Elaine's brows lifted. Is that what we're calling it now? He narrowed his eyes slightly. Would you prefer I lie? Elaine smiled tightly. I would prefer you think about the impression it leaves. For Theo. For your board. You know how this town operates. Image matters, dear. She's not a scandal, Elaine. She's not Sarah, Elaine replied quietly. And that's what people notice. That stopped him. She pressed on, softer now, like she believed herself kind. Your wife was beloved. She had grace, poise, and yes, a proper background. You bring in someone like this unknown, unvetted, with nothing but a ragged suitcase and a too easy smile. What does that say? Preston set his basket down on the counter, voice flat. It says I see value where others see shame. Elaine blinked. I didn't mean. I think you did, he cut in. He paid quickly and left the store without waiting for a goodbye. As he stepped back into the cold, the bite of the wind felt earned. He welcomed it. On the drive back up the mountain, he said nothing. Not to himself, not to the past, not even to the questions crawling beneath his ribs. But when he reached the house and opened the door, the smell of fresh bread greeted him. Papa, Theo's voice called from the living room. Miss Amara taught me how to braid dough. Preston stepped into the kitchen, snow still on his boots. Amara looked up from the oven, flour on her hands. Her dress sleeves rolled to the elbows. She smiled, but when she saw his face, her expression dimmed. What happened? She asked. He set the bags on the counter. Town. Amara wiped her hands slowly, watching him. I don't need to ask, she said. I've seen the looks before. I know the script. Preston didn't reply. You brought me into a world that doesn't welcome women like me, she said, voice steady. I didn't expect applause, but I didn't expect shame either. It's not you I'm ashamed of, he said quickly. Then what is it? She asked. He hesitated. That I didn't say more. Amara folded her arms, still covered in flour. You let them make me invisible. Preston looked away. I didn't plan for any of this. I didn't either, she said, softer now. But we're here. And Theo, your son, he sees me. So I'll ask you, Mr. Hale, what are you going to do with the gift he's already accepted? Preston had no answer. Not yet. That night, he walked to his workshop again. The flower he had been carving sat unfinished, its petals half-shaped, its lines hesitant. He stared at it under the hanging bulb, his hands clenched at his sides. Sarah's words returned to him again. Don't measure someone by the clothes they wear. Measure them by what they carry in silence and still offer freely. He exhaled slowly, sat, and picked up the carving knife. Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, something began to sharpen. The next day began with the smell of cinnamon. Again. It drifted through the halls of Preston Hale's estate like a quiet promise, warm, familiar, almost defiant. The snow had lightened but not stopped. Outside, everything was white and still. Inside, the house hummed with new rhythm. Preston stood at the doorway to the kitchen, silently observing. Theo was on a stool, dusted with flour, face glowing as he kneaded dough with both hands. His concentration was intense, his small mouth pressed into a focused line. Amara stood beside him, guiding without interfering. Now fold it like a letter, she instructed. Like Papa's business mail? Exactly, she smiled. Tuck the edges under. Bread likes to feel held. Theo giggled. Bread has feelings? Only the good kind. Preston's hand tightened around his coffee mug. His son hadn't laughed like that in months, free and open, without coaxing. There was no pretending in that sound, just joy. He stepped forward. What are we making today? He asked. Theo beamed. Cinnamon rolls. Preston raised an eyebrow. That's ambitious. Amara shrugged. He asked. I couldn't say no. Theo pointed at the baking sheet. We even made extra ones. One for Miss Amara, one for me, and one for you. Preston looked at the 3 rolls set apart from the rest. The gesture struck him harder than he expected. Thanks, kiddo, he said, voice low. Theo looked at Amara. Do you think Papa likes cinnamon? She smiled. I think he does now. They baked in silence after that. The good kind, the kind born of presence, not absence. Amara moved through the kitchen like it was hers. not with ownership but familiarity. Her movements had rhythm. She cleaned as she went, wiped Theo's hands when he got carried away, gently corrected his twisting of the dough without a sigh or frustration. Preston found himself watching more than helping. She wasn't performing. She wasn't here to impress. She just was. And that unsettled something inside him. After breakfast, Theo ran off to build a fort with couch cushions. Amara began washing up. Preston leaned on the island, arms crossed. "You're good with him," he said. She rinsed a pan. "I like kids. They're honest. He's different since you arrived." She glanced at him. "So are you." Preston stiffened. "That's not always a good thing, isn't it?" she asked. He laughs now. "You listen more, and the air doesn't feel so frozen." He didn't answer. She dried the skillet slowly, then set it on the rack. "May I ask you something?" she said, not quite looking at him. He nodded. "What happened to your wife?" Preston exhaled slowly. "Sarah died 2 years ago. Cancer. Quick. Aggressive. We tried everything. But she was gone in 7 months." Amara's expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded again. "Me too." "Oh." There was a long pause before he added, "After that, I stopped trying to fix anything. I just kept it running. For Theo, for the business, everything else shut down." Amara looked at him then, her voice gentler. "You don't need to be fixed, Mr. Hale. You just need to stop acting like you're broken beyond repair." He met her eyes and for the first time, didn't look away. That afternoon, the scent of cinnamon lingered, woven into the walls like memory. Theo fell asleep beside the fireplace, curled up in a nest of pillows, clutching his carved bird. Preston stepped into the kitchen to find Amara quietly mending a tear in one of Theo's mittens. She looked up, needle in hand. He caught it on a nail near the woodpile. "You don't have to do all this." "I know," she replied as she always did. "But it matters." Preston approached the table, set something down beside her. "The finished flower. Amara paused. Is that?" "I carved it," he said, "for Sarah once, but I never finished." She studied it, fingers grazing the petals. "It's beautiful. It's imperfect." "So was she," Amara said softly. "So are we all." Preston's breath hitched slightly, caught between memory and something newer, more fragile. He wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. Amara didn't press. She never did. But that evening, when she tucked Theo in and turned to leave the room, he whispered, "Don't go." "And I'll be right down the hall," she replied. He shook his head. "I mean, don't go away, like Mama." She bent down and brushed the hair from his forehead. "I'm not planning to." Theo blinked. "Do you promise?" Amara hesitated for the first time, because she knew better than to make promises lightly. But still, she nodded. "As long as I'm welcome." He nodded. "You are." Down the hall, Preston stood in the shadows, listening. And he realized he wasn't the only one deciding who stayed. It had been 10 days since Amara first appeared at Preston Hale's door in that tattered blue dress. Her eyes hollowed by fatigue. Her spirit dulled but not defeated. 10 days since the house, and the hearts within it, began to thaw. That morning, the estate was bathed in a soft gray light. Clouds hung low, heavy with the promise of more snow. Theo was at the kitchen table with a coloring book. Tongue poked slightly out as he concentrated. Amara sat beside him, carefully shading a chickadee with colored pencils. Preston stood near the window, coffee in hand, watching them from a distance. He no longer hovered. He simply observed quietly, cautiously, like a man watching something rare and tender bloom in winter. The doorbell rang. Preston's body tensed. No one ever rang the bell. He set the coffee down and strode toward the foyer. Through the beveled glass, he saw a familiar silhouette. Elaine Carson, and she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man in a suit, and a woman holding a clipboard. Press, or worse, someone from the board. He opened the door slowly. Elaine didn't wait for a greeting. "I hope we're not intruding," she said, stepping forward in her fur-lined coat, heels tapping on the stone like judgment. "You are," Preston said flatly. The man extended a hand. "Mr. Hale, I'm Miles Braxton, from the Hale Foundation Advisory Board. This is Paige Landon." from the Image Integrity Division. Preston didn't shake his hand. Image Integrity? Elaine smiled tightly. They're just here for a quick review. Routine. Given your recent living arrangement. Amara appeared at the hallway's edge. She had changed into a simple brown sweater and dark slacks Preston had found in storage Sarah's clothes, repurposed gently. The fit wasn't perfect, but she looked more at home in them than anyone had in that house in 2 years. Her eyes flicked to the guests, and though she said nothing, her spine straightened. Miles glanced at her. And you must be the guest we've heard so much about, Elaine added. The community's curious, that's all. After all, it's rare for someone to arrive so suddenly, especially without background. Amara stepped forward, chin high. I'm Amara Benson, she said clearly, and I didn't come here for charity. Preston's voice cut in. She came because she was invited. Lon. Paige scribbled something on her clipboard. Elaine's eyes narrowed. We're simply concerned about appearances. As members of the Hale Foundation, we're tasked with preserving its legacy. Sarah would have understood. Preston stepped in front of Amara slightly. Don't use her name to mask your smallness. Silence fell. Elaine's face twitched. You're emotional. No, he said coldly. I'm clear. Miles shifted awkwardly. We'll just do a brief walkthrough. Nothing invasive. No, you're not walking through my house, Preston replied. You want to talk legacy? Sarah's legacy was about compassion, not classism. It was about seeing people for who they were, not what they wore. Amara touched his arm gently. It's okay. No, Preston said louder now. It's not. He turned to the presswoman. Take your notes. Report back. Tell them I said this if the board wants to question my values. They can do it at the next meeting. But in this house, we treat people with dignity. Elaine scoffed. You've let your grief blind you. No, Preston replied. My grief finally cleared. He closed the door without another word. Inside, the air pulsed with unspoken electricity. Theo peeked out from behind the hallway. Papa? He asked, voice small. Are we in trouble? Preston walked over, knelt beside him. No, son. We're not in trouble. We're telling the truth. And sometimes, that makes people uncomfortable. Theo glanced at Amara. Are they going to make her leave? Preston looked up at her, and for the first time, he said it aloud. No one is making her leave. She's family now. Amara's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Later that night, Theo fell asleep early, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day. Preston sat in the living room with Amara, a fire burning low. He spoke first. I should have told them off years ago. She smiled faintly. But you told them today. I meant what I said. I know. He leaned back, his gaze on the carved flower on the mantel. You said once you saw worth where others saw rags, he murmured. I still do. He turned to her. Do you see that in me? She didn't hesitate. I always did. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, the foundations once cold and silent began to glow with life again. The snow had softened. For the first time in days, the sky above Aspen cracked open, revealing slivers of blue between the clouds. The sunlight spilled through the windows of Preston Hale's estate, casting gentle patterns across the wood floors like lace. In the stillness of late morning, Amara stood at the laundry sink, carefully soaking the tattered blue dress she had arrived in. Her fingers moved slowly, reverently, as if she were washing not just fabric, but memory. Preston entered, pausing at the doorway. His footsteps were quiet, but she didn't startle. Thought you might have thrown that out by now, he said softly. She looked up, her hands still in the suds. No. It got me here. He stepped closer, watching the way her eyes lingered on the cloth. It's not much, she added, but sometimes the things we survive in deserve to be remembered. Preston studied her. I don't think I ever looked at it the way you do. You mean as something more than rags? He didn't answer. She pulled the dress from the water and began gently wringing it out, her voice quiet. My mother wore this the day she stood up to our landlord. We were being evicted. She had nothing but her voice, but she made him look her in the eye. Preston leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You wear it like armor. I wear it like truth. They stood in silence, the only sound the water dripping into the basin. "Amara," he said finally, "do you believe in timing?" She hung the dress on a drying rack before turning to him. "I believe in second chances, but only if people recognize them when they arrive." He nodded slowly. Later that day, Theo asked to go sledding. The request was spontaneous, but it sparked something in all of them. Amara wrapped him in layers, tying his scarf with the same care she once gave her students. Preston brought down the old wooden sled Sarah had bought before she passed the one they'd never used. They trudged up the slope behind the house. The sun was gentle, the air crisp but not cruel. Theo squealed as the sled flew down the hill, Amara running beside him, laughter chasing them like a promise. Preston stood at the top, watching. For a moment, he saw them clearly, his son's joy, Amara's unguarded smile, the mountain behind them gleaming like a cathedral. He let go of the guilt, of the expectations, of the silence. When he joined them at the bottom of the hill, Theo threw his arms around him. "This is the best day ever." Amara caught Preston's gaze and smiled, not with amusement, but with quiet recognition, a knowing that neither of them could name, but both understood. That night, after Theo fell asleep, they sat by the fire again. "I'm not the same man I was 10 days ago," Preston said. "No one's the same after telling the truth," she replied. He looked at her hands, resting on her lap. "You've done more for me and Theo than anyone has in years. I keep asking myself why." Amara's voice was steady. "Because someone did it for me once. And I never forgot how it felt." Preston's throat tightened. "You don't owe us anything." "I know," she said gently. "That's what makes it real." He leaned forward slightly. "You're not what I expected." Amara smiled faintly. "Neither are you." "No two." They sat there, in the hush of the fire, in the lull of healing, and for the first time, there was no urgency to fix, to impress, to explain. Only presence. Outside, the snow continued to melt beneath the stars. The next morning, Amara decided to go into town. It was Theo's idea, really. "You should get something nice, Miss Amara," he had said with all the innocence of a child who didn't yet understand how the world calculated worth. "Something not patched, something with buttons." She had smiled, ruffled his curls, and promised to think about it. So here she was walking down Main Street in Aspen, her boots crunching through half-melted snow, wearing a borrowed coat from Preston's guest closet and gloves Theo insisted she take. The town was quaint, polished. Boutique windows glimmered with Christmas decor, warm light spilling onto the sidewalks. It looked like something out of a snow globe. And yet, every step she took echoed. Every glance lingered a second too long. She walked past Linden and Sons clothiers and caught her reflection in the glass. She didn't see shame, but she did see contrast. The coat hung a little loose on her. Her boots were scuffed. Her hair had fought the dry mountain air all morning. Still, she held her head high. Inside the bookstore, she browsed slowly, letting the scent of paper and ink settle her nerves. She ran her fingers along the spines of books, stories she once read aloud in noisy classrooms to children who called her Miss B, with sticky fingers and open hearts. The woman behind the counter watched her closely. "Looking for anything in particular?" the clerk asked. "Just browsing." The woman's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're new in town." "Yes. You're staying with Mr. Hale, I heard." Amara met her gaze evenly. "That's right." The woman nodded, tight-lipped. "Well, let us know if you need anything." It was both an offer and a warning. Amara thanked her politely and left without buying anything. Outside, the wind had picked up. She walked 2 blocks, her thoughts swirling. She had expected judgment. She hadn't expected it to feel like old bruises being pressed again. She stopped at a consignment shop tucked between a bakery and a florist. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. The warmth hit her cheeks immediately. A woman behind the counter, a black woman in her 60s with silver braids and clear eyes, looked up and smiled. "Well now, you look like you need a cup of tea," the woman said. Amara exhaled. "That obvious? Baby, that town's been tightening its collar since I got here in '92. You walked in like breath on glass." Amara laughed, startled by how good it felt. The woman motioned to the back. "Tea's in the corner. I got peach, lemon, or the kind that kicks? No. Amara poured a cup and sat near the old radiator. The shop was filled with vintage coats, faded novels, costume jewelry, and framed records. Name's Marion, the woman said, settling into a chair across from her. You're Amara. Yes, I've heard. Amara sipped her tea. I figured. Marion leaned back. I also heard you had the courage to walk into this town in a dress that told the truth. Amara blinked. What do you mean? Rags don't lie, not like we do. That dress told folks you've been through the fire, and you're still standing. That scares people more than anything. Amara stared into her tea. You're not the first to be judged, Marion continued. You might be the first to answer back with grace. That's rarer. They spoke for another hour about nothing and everything. When Amara left, Marion handed her a wrapped parcel and winked. It's on me. Call it a welcome gift. Back at the estate, Preston was in the kitchen when she returned. Theo ran to greet her, arms open. You were gone forever, he cried. I was gone for an hour. That's forever in kid time. She laughed and hugged him tightly. Preston looked up. How was town? Amara hesitated, then handed him the parcel. Mixed reviews, but I met someone good. He opened it. Inside was a deep green shawl, soft and hand-woven, embroidered with vines and small birds. Delicate, resilient. She said it's a welcome gift, Amara said. Preston met her eyes. That's what you deserve. That evening, as Theo fell asleep to the sound of Amara's soft humming, Preston stood at the window, watching snowflakes swirl in the lamplight. He thought about the woman who walked down Main Street with her chin high. He thought about the town that had never been told the truth quite like this before. And he knew, the ground was shifting. The evening air inside the Hale estate was filled with the faint scent of pinewood and baked apples Amara's doing, of course. The apple crisp she had prepared rested on the kitchen counter, untouched but fragrant. Preston sat in his study, staring at a letter he hadn't opened in 2 years. The envelope was weathered, cream-colored, with Sarah's handwriting on the front. He had kept it tucked inside the pages of a book, a movable feast, on the third shelf of his study. He didn't know why today of all days he pulled it out. Only that watching Amara walk in earlier with that new green shawl, cheeks flushed from the cold, had awakened something long buried. He ran his fingers over Sarah's name. To be read when you're ready, she had written on the back. Down the hall, he could hear Amara humming softly as she tucked Theo into bed. It was the same lullaby Sarah used to sing. The letter remained sealed. He placed it gently back between the pages and closed the book. Downstairs, Amara was in the kitchen, cleaning up. She was wearing the shawl Marion had given her, and it suited her, earthy and elegant, woven with care. She didn't hear Preston approach. You always hum that tune, he said quietly. She looked up, smiling faintly. It's an old one. My mother used to sing it. He leaned against the doorframe. So did Sarah. They stood in that silence again, not empty, not tense, just full. You're good with Theo, he said. I care about him. That's more than I've heard from people who've known him his whole life. She tilted her head, curious. Is this the part where you ask me to stay longer? Preston looked at her for a long time. It's the part where I admit I don't want you to leave. She dried her hands slowly, setting the towel down. Then you should know. This isn't easy for me. He nodded. I know. I've spent most of my life being watched and measured. Lately, for the first time, I feel seen. You are, he said simply. Amara exhaled. Then don't make promises you're not ready to keep. I'm not promising anything yet, he replied. I'm just telling the truth. That night, they sat together on the couch as Theo slept upstairs. A record played softly, Ella Fitzgerald, sweet and low. Preston spoke first. Do you ever miss what you had before, even if it wasn't much? All the time, Amara said. Even the bad days had pieces of beauty. He looked down at his hands. I think I'm scared of letting go of my grief. It feels like letting go of her. She nodded. But what if letting go doesn't mean forgetting? He didn't respond. She continued, voice gentle. What if it means making room? The next morning, the world outside was quiet snow resting on branches, clouds painted in soft pink light. Amara stepped out onto the back porch, mug in hand, shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Preston joined her. They stood there, side by side, as the sun crept over the ridge. I didn't open the letter, he admitted. You don't have to. I want to. Just, not yet. She turned toward him. Take your time. Healing isn't a race. He smiled faintly. You sound like someone who's done it before. I haven't, she said. I'm still learning. They watched the sunrise in silence, two people standing on the edge of something tender and real, not quite ready to name it, but no longer afraid to feel it. The wind had shifted again. By afternoon, clouds rolled in thick and low over the mountain ridge, bringing with them the kind of silence that came before a storm. Inside the Hale estate, the usual warmth of the hearth seemed muted, as if the house itself were bracing for something. Preston stood at his study window, watching the clouds. He didn't like the look of them. Not just the weather, but the feeling in his gut. Unease. Like the past wasn't done with him yet. His phone buzzed. A message from Carl, his longtime attorney and friend. Call me. Now. Preston stepped out into the hallway and dialed. Carl answered on the first ring. It's about Amara. His body went cold. What happened? You've been discreet, Carl said. But not enough. Someone's been digging. Who? The foundation board. Elaine. Possibly a couple of donors. They're trying to trace Amara's background, employment history, family records. And someone contacted one of her old landlords. Huh. Preston's jaw clenched. She doesn't owe them anything. That's not how they see it. They're spinning it into an image issue. If they find any hint of instability, they'll demand she be removed from the property for your reputation. For Theo. Preston's voice dropped into a growl. She's not going anywhere. I didn't think she would, but you need to prepare. If they file a formal complaint, things could get messy. Die. He ended the call and turned, only to find Amara standing at the end of the hall. I didn't mean to overhear, she said quietly, but I heard enough. Preston approached her, slow and steady. I won't let them touch you. She didn't flinch, but her shoulders tensed. This isn't just about me. It's about Theo. Your legacy. Your work. I don't care about any of that. You should. He stopped inches from her. I care about what matters. You. Him. This. No. Amara's voice softened, but the steel remained beneath. Then you need to understand something. I've spent my whole life being a ghost. Unseen. Unwanted. I won't let them make me one again. I won't let them either. But even as he said it, thunder rolled in the distance. That night, the storm came. Snow slammed against the windows. The power flickered. Theo, nervous, curled up beside Amara, under a thick blanket, as she read to him by flashlight. Preston paced by the fire, mind racing. Amara caught his eye. Sit down. Be present. He looked at her, really looked, and nodded. He sat beside them, pulled Theo into his lap, and listened as Amara continued reading from a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. Her voice was calm, anchoring. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, they were safe for now. But they all knew morning would bring something else. A reckoning. The snow had stopped. By morning, the estate was buried in silence and white thick drifts blanketing the driveway, trees drooping under the weight of winter. But it wasn't the snow that made Preston wake early. It was the email. Subject line, Urgent Foundation Review Committee Decision. He opened it with dread crawling up his spine. It was official. The board was convening an emergency review of his standing, his leadership, his judgment, and his living arrangement with a non-verified individual of unclear background. They used words like integrity, community values, and public perception. They requested a response within 24 hours. Failure to cooperate would result in a temporary suspension of voting power and executive privileges. In short, they wanted Amara gone. He closed the laptop slowly, then stared at the rising sun through the frost-laced window. It lit the trees like stained glass, beautiful and cold. Downstairs, Amara was already up, making tea. She didn't ask if something was wrong. She knew. They came for me, didn't they? She asked without turning around. Preston moved toward her. They came for me. You're just the excuse. She poured the tea, steady hands betraying none of the fear she must have felt. What will you do? I'm not backing down. Amara placed a cup in front of him. You might lose everything. I already did, he said quietly. This, you and Theo, is the first thing that feels like home again. He paused. I can't go back to silence. I won't. She looked at him then. Then I'll stay. Theo came bounding down the stairs in his pajamas. Why are you two whispering? Is it another snow day? Preston crouched and pulled him close. Kind of. We might have some visitors today. Theo frowned. Mean ones? Preston hesitated, then nodded. Some people who think Miss Amara doesn't belong here. Theo blinked, then turned to Amara. You belong with us. Amara knelt to meet his eyes. Thank you, little man. He hugged her tight, then scampered off to the living room. Later that afternoon, they came. 3 SUVs rolled up the long drive. A board representative. Elaine. A legal advisor. And, to everyone's surprise, a reporter. Preston opened the door before they could knock. You're not welcome here, he said flatly. The representative stepped forward. We're here in official capacity. You received our notice. I did, and I'm not budging. Elaine's eyes scanned the house. Where is she? Amara stepped forward from the dining room, poised, shoulders back. I'm right here. Elaine gave a thin smile. We're not here to hurt you, dear. We just want to preserve the standards this foundation was built on. Oh, Amara answered, voice clear and unwavering. And what standard is that? Only loving people who look like you? A hush fell over the group. Preston stepped in. You all have decisions to make. But let me be clear. This woman has shown more strength, dignity, and compassion than anyone sitting on your board. Elaine bristled. This isn't personal. It is now, Preston snapped. You've made it personal by assuming she's less. By assuming I'm less for choosing what's real over what looks good. The reporter, a younger woman with an open face and fast fingers, perked up. This is off the record, Elaine hissed. No, Preston said. It's very much on the record. He turned to the reporter. You want a story? Here it is. The Hale Foundation, built by my late wife who believed in justice and dignity, wants to exile a woman because she doesn't have a pedigree, because she dared to survive. Meh. Amara stood beside him, unflinching. Print that, he said. The reporter scribbled furiously. Elaine paled. You'll regret this. I already regret staying silent this long. As the group retreated, unsure and shaken, Amara whispered to him, That was a war you just started. Preston turned to her. No, he said. That was a line I finally drew. The fallout came fast. By morning, Preston's inbox was flooded. Messages from board members, from donors, from journalists, all either demanding clarification or offering thinly veiled warnings. Some were polite, most weren't. He didn't answer any of them. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold in his hands, as Amara braided Theo's hair with gentle fingers. The boy chattered about his snow fort, unaware of the storm gathering just beyond the warmth of home. Amara glanced at Preston. What did they say? They want me to resign, he replied quietly. Theo looked up. What does that mean? Preston forced a smile. It means I don't have to go to boring meetings anymore. Amara's eyes didn't soften. She knew what it really meant. Power, influence, leverage. To protect the foundation Sarah had started from becoming the opposite of everything she believed. You should fight it, she said. I did, Preston said, and I will, but if I lose, I don't want it to be for nothing. Amara went quiet, then. It won't be. That afternoon, Marion arrived unannounced. She brought food, spicy gumbo in a thermos and sweet cornbread wrapped in a checkered cloth. You're about to be famous, she said dryly, setting the food down. Preston raised a brow. For what? For saying what half this town thinks and the other half fears. Marion turned to Amara. They're coming for you, baby, but you're not alone. Amara smiled faintly. I know. I've got friends on the city council, Marion continued. And a niece at the Denver Tribune. She's already pitching your story. Not the scandal. The survival. Preston looked surprised. Why are you helping us? Marion gave him a long look. Because someone helped me once. Because justice don't grow unless someone waters it. By evening, things changed again. Theo found an envelope tucked into the mailbox. No return address. No name. Just a simple note inside. You don't know me, but I saw what you did. and I want you to know you were right. She's not like the others. She's better. I remember her from before. Enclosed with the note was a single photo, a grainy image of Amara at a community center, surrounded by children. Her face glowed. Her hands were outstretched, lifting a small girl into her arms. Amara held the photo to her chest, trembling. I thought no one remembered. Preston stepped closer. Who was she? A student, Amara whispered. One of the kids I lost when the school closed down. I thought they forgot me. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. That night, after Theo fell asleep wrapped in a quilt Amara had patched, Preston finally retrieved the letter again. Sarah's letter. He opened it slowly, his hands steady this time. If you're reading this, it means you've found something or someone worth fighting for again. I hope you didn't wait too long. Grief is a necessary wait. But don't let it become your home. His eyes burned as he read the rest. The letter spoke of love, of letting go, of the quiet permission to live again. When he looked up, Amara was standing in the doorway. I opened it, he said. She didn't speak. She just walked over, sat beside him, and reached for his hand. Outside, the stars burned clear. Inside, the war wasn't over, but something else had begun. The boardroom had never felt colder. Preston stood alone at the head of the long oak table, hands braced against the polished surface. Opposite him sat Elaine and 6 other members of the Hale Foundation board. Some he'd known for decades. Others were new faces, corporate, polished, and loyal to image more than mission. Behind him, a screen blinked to life with the official agenda. Emergency review, Preston Hale's fitness to lead. Carl, Preston's attorney, sat quietly at his side. The air was tight with tension. Elaine adjusted her glasses. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that this is a closed meeting, and our deliberation is confidential. Preston said nothing. Mr. Hale, she continued, you've been a steward of this foundation since its inception, but your recent choices, specifically involving Miss Amara Benson, have raised significant concerns about your judgment. Be specific, Preston said flatly. Elaine smirked. Your decision to house and publicly defend a woman with no clear employment history, a history of eviction, and no known familial ties within our network, that jeopardizes the legacy we've all worked to preserve. Carl leaned forward. What my client has done is honor the values this foundation was founded on: compassion, restoration, and equality. A murmur passed through the room. Preston's voice was calm but firm. My wife built this foundation to help people like Amara, people who are overlooked and silenced. If you strip that mission from its core, then you're not protecting her legacy, you're betraying it. Elaine opened a file. Her past is riddled with instability. So was mine, Preston said. So is anyone's who's ever fought for their life. Another board member, a silver-haired man named Walker, cleared his throat. We're not here to attack character. We're here to address risk. Carl interjected. The only risk here is a man standing by his integrity being punished for it. Elaine pushed her chair back. Let's vote. Preston stood tall. Before you do, I want you to hear one thing. He pulled a sheet of paper from his pocket. It's from Sarah. Her last letter. Carl's eyes widened. Preston read aloud. Don't let the weight of grief harden you. Let it mold you. If you find someone who reminds you how to feel, don't shut the door on them. You don't need to explain it. Just live it. He looked around the table. I'm living it. Silence. The vote began. 7 names. 7 voices. 4 voted for his removal. 2 abstained. Walker paused the longest. Then finally clearly, no, he stays. Elaine stood. Then we defer to public relations, and they're demanding action. Just then, a knock at the door. The assistant entered holding a tablet. You'll want to see this, she whispered. Elaine frowned, took the tablet, and pressed play. A video, already viral. It showed Amara at the community center years ago, surrounded by children, teaching, laughing, holding space. Then another clip, Preston at the estate, declaring his loyalty to what mattered. Then Theo, she belongs with us. And finally Marion. Justice don't grow unless someone waters it. Elaine's hands trembled. The assistant added. The Tribune ran it this morning. It's everywhere. Number Justice for Amara is trending nationwide. Carl smiled. Looks like the public has voted too. Walker looked at Elaine. Are we going to pretend this doesn't matter? She said nothing. Preston folded his arms. So what's it going to be? Elaine sat down slowly, her face pale. The room was still. And then quietly, begrudgingly, she said, You remain interim chair. For now. Preston nodded once. Good. Then let's get back to what matters. May. He left without another word, heart pounding but sure. The door closed behind him, cutting off the old world, leaving room for the new. At home, Amara waited by the fire, eyes lifted when he entered. Well? She asked. Preston crossed the room and sat beside her, pulling her hand into his. I chose you, he whispered. And this time, the world didn't stop me. The following days unfolded with an unfamiliar softness. The air outside still held winter's chill. But inside the Hale estate, something had begun to thaw for good this time. There was no parade, no grand announcement, just quiet mornings, shared glances, the gentle hum of life rediscovered. Preston found himself waking early, not out of habit or anxiety, but because he wanted to hear Amara humming in the kitchen, wanted to walk with Theo out into the fresh snow, wanted to sit by the fire after dinner with no meetings, no crisis, no one demanding he pick between truth and appearance. Just them, and it was enough. That morning, Theo ran into the dining room waving a small piece of construction paper. Look what I made! Amara took it gently. It was a crayon drawing 3 stick figures under a tree, one taller than the rest with a green shawl. In bright yellow letters, Theo had written, My family. Preston looked at it for a long time. Can I frame it? Theo beamed. Yeah, but it has to go in the living room where everyone sees it. Amara smiled, a rare kind, the kind that rose all the way from old scars, through every layer of her being, and reached the surface like a bloom breaking through ice. Later that afternoon, Marion stopped by. I brought seeds, she announced, waving a small packet like a prize. Amara raised an eyebrow. Seeds? Flower seeds. Wild ones. For spring. It's coming sooner than you think. Preston chuckled. You planting them or just preaching? Both, Marion said, placing the packet on the kitchen counter. You've done the hard part already, digging up the cold ground. She turned to Amara. You've made roots here, honey. I can feel it. Amara touched the edge of the packet. Black-eyed Susans. Hardy. Resilient. Bright. Preston watched her. Want to plant them with me when it's time? She nodded. Yeah. I'd like that. That night, they made dinner together. Nothing fancy, chili and cornbread, but it felt like a celebration. Theo danced in his socks on the hardwood floor while Ella Fitzgerald played softly in the background. Amara and Preston moved around the kitchen with an ease that felt almost practiced. You're good at this, she said, gesturing to the chopping board. Years of solo dinners, he replied. It was either learn to cook or surrender to frozen pizza. She laughed. You made the right choice. No. When they finally sat down, Theo insisted on saying grace. Thank you for chili and music, and that nobody is mean anymore, he said with his eyes squeezed shut, and for Miss Amara staying forever. Amara blinked, her heart tightening. After dinner, Theo fell asleep on the couch, curled into a blanket he and Amara had sewn patches on together. Preston and Amara stepped outside onto the back porch. The sky was dark, clear, glittering with stars. I've been thinking about what you said, Preston murmured. Which part? About letting go, not meaning forgetting. She waited. I think I'm ready, he said, to live again, not just for Theo, but for me. Amara didn't reply right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded note. What's that? A letter I wrote to myself, she said. When I had nothing left. He looked at her, eyes gentle. What did it say? She opened it and read aloud, voice barely above a whisper. You are not invisible. Not broken. Not done. The world may never hand you peace, but you can still grow something beautiful from what's left behind. Preston stared at her, the wind brushing snow from the porch railing. Can I keep that? He asked. She handed it to him. No, she said softly. You can share it. That's how it becomes real. As the stars burned above them, neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. Spring was still a ways off, but the thaw had begun. Spring arrived quietly, not with fanfare, but with the slow retreat of snow, the soft drip of melting icicles, and the stubborn green buds pushing their way through the once frozen earth. Aspen, still clinging to its postcard charm, seemed to blink awake from a long winter's nap. At the Hale estate, life pulsed forward with new rhythm. Theo was back in school, still shy, still quiet but no longer silent. Amara had helped him build a daily routine, complete with drawings and small rewards. He hadn't had a meltdown in weeks. His teachers called it a transformation. Preston called it healing. Amara had taken over the greenhouse behind the house, a small glass building Sarah once used for orchids. Now, under Amara's care, it was full of herbs, wildflowers, and tender sprouts of vegetables. Her hands had found purpose again, soil under her nails, light in her eyes. That morning, Marian arrived with a shovel slung over her shoulder. "It's time," she said simply. The garden bed behind the estate had been dug weeks ago. Today, they planted black-eyed Susans, lavender, lemon balm, forget-me-nots, flowers tough enough to weather storms and soft enough to remind the world beauty was still possible. Theo helped dig the holes. Amara placed the seeds. Preston watered them in silence. And then, without fanfare, they stood back and admired the nothingness, just a patch of dark earth. But they knew it would bloom. Later that week, Preston received a letter. This one official bearing the seal of the Hale Foundation. He opened it slowly. Elaine was stepping down. Public pressure, donor backlash, and internal shifts had made her position untenable. The board had voted in a new chair, Walker, and Preston was being offered permanent reinstatement with full executive authority. No strings, no oversight. He brought the letter to Amara. "What will you do?" she asked. "I'll accept it," he said, "on one condition." She raised a brow. "That the foundation changes its charter. No more legacy-first rhetoric. We go back to Sarah's vision. Real people, real work. And if they say no?" Preston smiled. "Then we start something new." Duh. The next day, Amara stood at the podium of the community center newly reopened under a joint effort by Marian, Preston, and several reformed board members. She read Theo's drawing aloud. "My family," she said, holding the paper for all to see. "That's what healing looks like." Preston stood in the back, arms folded, watching the way the room leaned in when she spoke. Not because of her title or pedigree, but because of her presence. After the event, he met her outside beneath the blooming dogwoods. "You were amazing," he said. "I just told the truth." He took a breath. "I've been thinking about what comes next." She tilted her head. "For the foundation? For us?" The wind played gently through her hair. "I'm not asking for a promise," he said. "Just a place to begin." She smiled, slow and certain. "This is a good place." They walked back to the estate in silence, hand in hand. And weeks later, when the flowers in the garden finally bloomed, Theo brought out his crayons again and made a new drawing, this one with 5 stick figures, not 3. "Who's the other 2? Preston asked. Theo grinned. "Miss Marian and the flowers. They're part of us now." And just like that, the story began again, not with tragedy, but with seed and soil, sun and second chances. The kind of ending only real life can write. The story teaches us that true strength lies not in power or prestige, but in compassion, resilience, and the quiet courage to stand by what is right even when it costs you everything. It reminds us that healing takes time. Love can grow from broken places, and justice often begins with one brave voice, refusing to be silenced.